The 20th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure is hereby reconvened. My name is Stephen Crease, and I'm the chairman of this committee. On my left,
good morning. My name is Wade Mark, member.
Franklin Khan, member.
Good morning, Rushton Parry, Vice Chairman.
this hearing is being broadcast live on the Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Members of the viewing and listening audience may send comments via email at parl101@ttparliament.org or on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament or on Twitter at ttparliament. I would like at this stage to remind members and witnesses to please turn off their cell phones or place same on silent or vibrate. I would like now to welcome the representatives of the Trinidad and Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association and invite them to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Christopher James. I'm the President of the Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association. To my left is the Vice President, Caroline Birchwood James. To my right is the Secretary, Miss Shirley Cook, and a representative, Ms. Kay Trotman. I'd like Caroline Birchwood James to make an opening statement, please.
For the sake of the record, I wish to remind all concerned of the objectives of this inquiry, and it is to understand the current state of the ferry service in Trinidad and Tobago, to examine the policies and procedures used to acquire ferries, and to ensure that value for money is obtained, to determine whether due diligence governs the conduct of all aspects of the maintenance and management of the provision of the seabridge service, and to determine the changes and challenges with respect to the maintenance of ferries, and all of this against the backdrop of the procurement and maintenance of ferries. Do you, sir, wish to make opening statement? Please do so now.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association welcomes the re-invitation by the Joint Select Committee to present solutions to the ferry service as we seek to develop and redirect the economy and business of Tobago and Trinidad. Mr. Chairman, as we were checking in Tobago this morning, we were informed that the ferry did not leave Tobago as scheduled, 6:30. In fact, passengers came to the Caribbean Airlines counter to see if they would be able to come to Trinidad. So, Mr. Chairman, little confidence has been restored on the sea bridge. In fact, the fast ferry is no longer fast. Visitors question the integrity of the service and have not returned in their numbers. We are recommending a new passenger ferry is needed now. Since the last Joint Select Committee meeting, the conditions on the Cobalt Star has improved minimally. Toilets are now working, but they're inadequate. 45 steps, we've counted them, no elevator. Catering service is really to parlor status. From all accounts, the infrastructure on this boat is unsuitable, and the cargo requirements of the cargo requirements of the sea bridge and its users. We refer to a document the association has prepared, and I think it should be in your possession, and presented to the Joint Select Committee on the solutions to the sea bridge in the immediate, medium, and long term. Yes. We need.
I would end there.
Yes.
Yeah, end there, I think.
Yeah. All right. Yes, so we end this opening statement, and we await your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning again, and thank you for making the journey back to Trinidad. I read the documents that you supplied, and just for clarity's sake, if you could give us paint a picture in terms of, the short-term solution. You suggested the formation of a special purpose vehicle to deal with this matter expeditiously. Can you go ahead and just explain to this committee the thinking behind it as to bring some clarity to how it's going to be created in your mind and how it will be executed, and bring a solution to have a real impact on the current situation for us? Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Kay Trotman is going to answer that question.
Thank you very much, Ms. James. Our thought behind it was that we cannot look at the solution for the sea bridge just in terms of a replacement vessel, but we need to also look at the sort of institutional changes that may need to accompany that in the light of dealing with the sea bridge issue and its impact on the economy of Tobago. So because we're now not just looking at replacement of a vessel, but how should those vessels impact the development of the economy? One of the things that we recognize is that you would have to look at some of the institutional or administrative structure that guide that, and use that towards medium-term solutions. We were suggesting that since we have to look at allowing the operations of the port as a suggestion to be handed to Tobago, since Tobago is the one that's being impacted, you would need the support structures that go with that. So given the special arrangement that may be in the Port Authority Act 15, where the president can at least start the process of having us look at, through special directive, look at some of the institutional changes. That was our understanding of reading that part of the Act that can support that. We know that longer-term changes to make Tobago be the source of dealing with the port would take a little while more than just the short term, so that this vehicle would allow us to start looking at that and putting the steps in place so that in the short term we can start the discussion as it relates to how the operation of the port from the end that is Tobago would impact on the economy.
Let me just follow up. From the last meeting where we spoke in Tobago, this committee had asked if your organization would have participated in the conversation around the tender that went out for a new fast ferry. And to my recollection at that time, there was no conversation or no input from your organization. That's correct? Since then until now, have there been any effort on the part of the Port Authority, on the part of the ministry, on the part of the Tobago House of Assembly to reach out to get some input before tenders start coming in and evaluation and so on? So has any of that started to happen as yet since that meeting?
Mr. James going to answer?
No, we've had no meeting. We've not had a meeting requested. And we urgently want to be part of that process, as I know other organizations, associations in Tobago need to be.
So basically, what you're saying is that in consideration of all the issues that have come out over the last couple of weeks, and more so statements that would have been made about the presentation of the facts about the situation in Tobago, I am very disturbed that no effort on the part of any agency of the state has reached out. And I'm wondering if there may be an effort not to. And I'm concerned with that because I would have thought that by now somebody would have reached out because this matter was in the public domain. You made an issue that no conversations had happened, and I am very concerned. And I'm really hoping that after today, after this hearing today, somebody reaches out. Thank you, sir.
I wish just to say this, that not only have we asked for an input in the procurement process for the passenger as well as the cargo ferries, but we also asked for a place on the board of the port as well as Caribbean Airlines. And we've got no response at this stage to that. Not that we are making a complaint as yet, but we have not got, we're making a statement of fact. We have not got a response as yet. But this is one of our recommendations that we have made.
Do you believe that the situation, the impact for Tobagonians have been exaggerated by your organization, primarily for your own business interests?
Ms. Cook is going to take that question.
Good morning. You see, your question speaks to the core of the issue that we're dealing here today. It speaks to the fact that Tobago's issues and its contribution to the development of Trinidad and Tobago is not taken on board as a critical and important element in the decision-making of Trinidad and Tobago. It is reflected in the fact that so little Tobago's input are on these boards. And therefore, the fact that no one has reached out to us speaks to the fact that they do not have the grasp of enormity of the problems that we are experiencing in Tobago.
If I'm to add a little to what my colleague said, it speaks to the bigger picture as to how the nation should look at how Trinidad and Tobago as individual islands should relate to each other as we seek to develop the economy of this unitary state. We must recognize the input and the value that each member, that is the islands, can bring to the table, so that we should not be seen as a ward of Trinidad, but a perspective that looks at Tobago as a potential economic region. How then do we pursue the development of Tobago as an economic region in a unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore what should be the institutional structure that we need to have in place and the administrative structures in order to have that happen. And that is why the solution that you mentioned, Member Perry, about that special purpose vehicle was looked at, because we're not looking at the solution for the sea bridge just in isolation of the procurement procedure, and that we are looking at it with a longer-term view of how should a developing economy like Tobago, that we are asking to diversify and diversify into tourism and agriculture, how should the inter-island transport system play a strategic position in that?
Last question, ma'am, and I want to focus this on, based on evidence that I would have read over the last couple of weeks in terms of the type of vessels, the requirement for the Tobago-Trinidad route. I have been reading that the current vessels, or there are issues around the vessels that were on the route of being too large, too costly in some cases. And I want to know if, in terms of the development of Tobago and Trinidad, whether we ought to buy or rent or lease or build vessels or buildings or parks that has no room for growth. Because in any business plan, and we all business people, we must put capacity in anything that we do. So I am concerned when I read some evidence from experts that a vessel was too big, that a deck was too large, we are running empty spaces. And to me, I'm asking, why do we confine ourselves to not having tools or equipment that can grow with the requirement? So this is why I'm concerned that you are not part of the conversation for this new tender that went out. And perhaps from my information, you may not have to wait too long, because I understand the ocean flower is docked in Chaguaramas as we speak. So you may be having a solution very, very soon to deal with it. But the question is, do you see that the previous vessel or vessels, the conversations about they being too large, too big, in terms of capacity, in terms of size, in terms of cost, when you measure the impact of what's happening now, is that a reasonable assessment in terms of the decision-making process?
Sir, no, it's not. And this has been a beef for a very long time in the industry. Tobago and Trinidad has a tremendous opportunity within tourism. Over 30 million people came to this region last year in 2016. Trinidad and Tobago got slightly over 2% of those tourists. The return on investment in tourism is well known in this region. Many countries are surviving on that return. And if we were to take tourism seriously, which in my opinion in the 25 years I've been here we never have, we would show that return on investment. And I've kept saying, and I know people behind me keep getting fed up of me saying this, but we have a double benefit in Trinidad and Tobago, because most of what we buy for the tourism industry is manufactured in Trinidad. And I've used the figure in the report just to underline it, that 70 cents in every tourism dollar stays in this country. In the Bahamas, it's 15 cents. That has to be worked. I met somebody from Exim Bank the other day, and we just did a calculation on bottled beer. When we had 88,000 tourists in Tobago, if they on average drank 4 bottles of beer, it was 3.5 million bottles of beer would be consumed in Tobago. That somebody has to put a cost value to that and say that this creates this many jobs in Trinidad, it's this amount of money made, and that adds to your return on investment. I've used the argument with Caribbean Airlines. I see that we constantly get told that Caribbean Airlines Airbridge loses $30 million. The very fact that Trinidadians come and holiday into Tobago has to be of benefit to Trinidad and Tobago, rather than going to Barbados or Grenada, which they have had a massive increase. Before we started this process, I had contact, we're part of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, so I get the figures from all of the islands as president. And when I spoke to these islands, they've seen a massive increase in Trinidadians going to these other islands. Now that is foreign exchange going out of your country, money going out of your country, jobs from manufacturing going out of your country. If we were to focus and really work out the data on how much tourism makes, with all its tendrils of business and everything, employment, I think we'd be shocked. I think in Trinidad and Tobago there is a very strong case. And going back to your question on the ferry specifically, there are many things we could be doing with that ferry. There are many things. We should be going to other destinations. We should be picking up people from other islands. We should be moving cargo. We should have an export industry. Most export industries are generated from customer demand when those people go back to their countries. There's tremendous opportunity in tourism that we are not taking advantage of. And the return on investment, especially at this time of shortage of foreign exchange, is very important to this country. I want to put forward as a very strong case for tourism in Trinidad and Tobago. So we do need to be an integral part of every decision made that affects tourism. And I don't think we realize how far tourism stretches in this society. Thank you.
I just want to emphasize a point here. Going to what, continuing what Mr. James said, where we talked about going to other islands, Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and so on, out of Tobago, earn foreign exchange, increase our tourism capacity. And in our paper, we talk about creating 3 ports, a passenger port, a commercial port for Tobago, and a marina. We have seen, we are the safest harbor. We've seen what has happened in the last week or 2. We are the safest harbor in the Caribbean. We used to have a lot of yachties and yachts. Yachties spend 6 months That's how they created the cruising hotel. 6 months on an island while your boat is being refurbished and whatever it is. And this is a great time, since we've shown that we are the safest harbor, this is a great time for us to build our marina in Tobago and to increase our yachting capacity, because we need the foreign exchange, we need the people to come here, whether they're on yachts, whether they're on the plane, whether they're on the ferries, boats, and so on. And that's the rationale why we ask for the 3 ports. Obviously, we cannot be like how we are. Depending on everything to come from Trinidad, we need a commercial port.
But if I'm to add to what my colleagues have said, I think when that, the previous cargo boat was selected, it was because the whole idea of expansion and development, growth and development, was built into the type of vessel that we should have. We should have a vessel with the capacity to handle more cargo items as the economy expanded. And therefore, the size of the vessel that was chosen. The fact that you are having, as it is being said, extra capacity on the vehicle only simply means that we have not fully caught up with what ought to come out of Tobago for full use of it. But you need to, it means that we are working towards it. You need to have the capacity to do that, given the fact that when you get a vessel, you don't get it for a short period of time. It's usually leased for a significant period of time. So you don't want to be constrained by your capacity to move things between the island. So the fact that it may not be fully utilized now should not necessarily be taken as a slap against Tobago. We have to build towards using that capacity, and that was the trend of the thought when that was done, and that was the direction Tobago was going in. What it calls for now is tighter collaboration between the private and public sector to make that happen faster.
Yeah, good day. Well, for the first time, I will be saying ladies and gentlemen. Yes. Yeah. We were in Tobago 2 weeks ago. Yeah, and we did, in fact, clearly get your views as to the specific ferries, what constraints there are, what limitations there are, and in your own words, how disastrous it turned out to the Tobago's tourism sector. Today, I don't want to focus too much on that because everybody knows the chronology of events that led to this issue. What, in my view, it has done is has exposed us to a situation where we have to face reality in its starkest form, and I guess that is what we want to do. So I want to focus my questioning on the future, which I like this document, and which is what it is intended to do. So I have specific questions. First and foremost, I agree that this country needs to build stronger institutions to do what it has to do, because this crisis reflects that. So how we run the entire ferry service, not only if a new boat comes on, everybody stay quiet because things going nice. How we run the institutional arrangement for these new vessels or these new vessels that we will procure. Some of your recommendations here personally finds favor with me. But just on 2 points of clarification. You have here reconfigure the Port Authority Board to have majority representation from Tobago. Obviously, remember the port's business is only 20% the entire ferry. It's a major container and containerized vessel system, which is the main port of Trinidad, which occupies 80% of their resources, their time and effort. But the Prime Minister has gone on record to say he's in agreement for greater Tobago representation on the Port Authorities Board, and I'm almost sure if he says so, that will happen. I think there was a commitment that the Tobago lobby we should, especially the private sector, have a greater role in the procurement process of these new ferries. I think the government is also committed to that. The issue of Tobago's representation, it has to be dealt with as a Tobago issue. So we cannot, most times we make legislation in Trinidad or we make policy in Trinidad. We do not, we stay away from identifying the specific organizations that will be represented. We say in Tobago's interests and let the Tobagonian fraternity come together and tell the central government who in this situation best seeks their interests. So that's my opening remarks. But specifically, how do you see this special purpose vehicle working? Give me a little more concrete terms as to how that will work.
Okay, in terms of how this should work, I think what we have presented is that we now need to sit and work that out against the background of what it is we want to achieve. What we have found is that as soon as an administration changes, a political administration changes, the thoughts of what projects and plans the previous administration has usually goes out the door. What you want is a vehicle that has the full representation of all concerned, both minority and the ruling administration, that we can say, this, we have agreed, this is in the best interest of the national development, and therefore then create the structures. It would require the legal minds to help us out because we are no legal minds. We are giving you from our lay perspective and our understanding of that particular part of the act, what we think could be something that can be pursued. And now we require the experts, as we like to guide us through the legal framework of what is possible where that is concerned. But what we want represented on that are the various parties that can agree and speak to the fact that if we are going down a particular line of development for Tobago as an economy, these are the things that should be taken into consideration as we look at the inter-island transport system as a critical pillar of that development.
And just to add to that, it's also recommendations from private sector organizations, not just from political organizations or the government. It's private sector representations that truly represent the associations they are part of.
And,
and changing the governance structure, all these are
and that
situations
this is
that
meant
you
to
will have
start.
deal with.
This is meant to start the discussion as to what now should be the best end result. So it's our seed planted, and we can now take that and flesh it out.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Well, I just want to add, and you make a very important point, because you see, and you could correct me, this body, you do not have subpoena powers, neither do you have enforcement powers. We're here to identify issues and probably to find solutions. So you hit the nail on the head when you say this is exactly what needs to be done, because at the end of the day, what we're struggling against with these committees, these interviews, is the fact that Trinidad needs to relinquish some of the powers with respect to services for which Tobago depends critically. And this is where relinquishing that element of the inter-island ferry service out of the Port Authority is an immediate solution to this problem.
Well, while we don't have subpoena powers in this committee, I can guarantee you that the government is listening.
I just want to say this to the committee, the chairman and the committee members. The position that we have put forward here, even in our paper, is from a wide cross-section of Tobago, not just our hoteliers or association alone. People saw us in front of the Joint Select Committee and made recommendations and so on to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning to the members of the Tobago Hotels and Tourism Association. Since our last meeting in Tobago, could you advise this JSC or committee how many more businesses have closed down, whether it is in the restaurant sector, whether it's in the hotel sector, how many workers have been put on the breadline, or have things remained steady and stable since our last meeting?
The best way to answer this is things have remained steady in the hope that we have a meeting soon with the Bankers Association, and I believe that we have seen further cutbacks in hours of work. We've seen no further closures. It's really going to start biting in the next couple of weeks to some of these people because we do not have that money that we would have made in July and August. So I do believe there's a hold-off to some extent. It's not going to. We need to make sure that we are talking with the bankers as soon as possible to make sure that there are no more closures.
Could you indicate to this committee whether the government, through the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Works and Transport, as examples, and the Prime Minister have reached out, have held any discussions with your association with a view to addressing some of the financial stresses that your association is experiencing through the slowdown in tourist activity or tourism activity and the demands that are being made by the banks for payments that remain outstanding? Have the government, through these various ministerial persons, reach out to your association?
We've had no direct reaching out. We did meet. We went to the Prime Minister's meeting whilst he was in Tobago, and we've seen in the press that consideration is being given to the tax amnesty that we requested, and also we requested that we would wish to meet with the banks, and if anything could be done with the banks. And I'm assuming that's why the Bankers Association is coming to see us.
Are you aware of an agreement which was arrived at on the 5th of March 2013 between the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Business Development Limited and a number of financial institutions, including Republic Bank, RBC, Scotia Bank, and the First Citizens Bank, with a view to providing, I would imagine, various stakeholders with easier access to loans for developmental purposes of your businesses in Tobago, and whether this memorandum of understanding or this memorandum of agreement is still in force as far as you are aware?
The discussion for that document, I just have to go back briefly to make it clear what happened. Because of the land license issue, which I mentioned last time and is in the report, was introduced in 2007 and was not available till October 2010. property prices dropped 30% in Tobago. Therefore, the equity that people had in their properties is devalued. We then had a problem that we had no foreign direct investment because it was taking 18 months to get a license. It's supposed to take 20 days according to the Act. It's been taking 18 months on average. Therefore, we thought the best solution to rebuild the confidence of the industry, and there are several reports written about this at the time, what we find in talking to, when we went to investment conferences, there was no interest in investing in Tobago. There were 12 projects that were stopped by the land license that would have provided close to 1,000 rooms. Many people were damaged and lost money. Therefore, we thought the best thing to do, because it's done in other countries, is to have this government loan guarantee, which is what you're talking about. The problem with the implementation of that government loan guarantee, first of all, the banks took a very long time to discuss it and be part of it. And then they restricted the term of repayment to 7 years. And the interest rate, I can't remember what the interest rate was, it was too high. Therefore, people that had a 10 or 12-year loan, 15-year loan, were being asked to reduce that loan term to 7 years, which would not make this work. There seemed to be, not only of the opinion of the Hotel Association, but other associations, because the Chamber was very heavily involved with us in this document. We were never confident that this was being received seriously. The fund was actually supposed to have $250 million in it, and the only money that was drawn down was $60 million, and it was lodged in Exim Bank. As I mentioned earlier, I met with Exim Bank the other day because we are discussing this again. There were other queries made, but it was never the intention. It never felt like there was an intention to implement this and carry this forward. And it was what was needed to get us up to standard.
If I can add to what my colleague just said, whereas it is a possible solution as an instrument, its implementation and the nature of it, how it was executed, meant that it could never work. This was supposed to be of a developmental focus. How then can a commercial entity truly execute something that is developmental in nature? That is not the essence of a commercial bank. So it needed to have, since it's developmental in its approach, should have been in an appropriate financing vehicle. That is development and can therefore look at the terms and condition that would suit the industry, the lower interest, the longer repayment terms, so that it could be possible for us to make those terms. So it's a good idea. We want to revisit it, but we feel that the financing vehicle needs to be different, and that is why we mentioned in our proposal the whole concept of looking at the Marshall Plan in terms of creating a framework for development. If we're going back to Tobago as an economic region in Trinidad and Tobago, how do we approach getting that done? There are lessons to be learned. If Trinidad and Tobago needs to be successful in these trying times where our oil reserves and the earnings we can get from that is challenged now on the world scene, we need to take a different and a more deliberate approach to how we have these programs executed, not normally in the same old traditional way. We have to use different hybrids, different innovative. We may need to even create something that just works for us. It may not have been used before, but given what our profile and our peculiarities are, we may need to create something that just works for us and start a different precedent.
May I ask through the chairman, is the memorandum of agreement dead?
Well, you want to?
No, it's still active in the sense it's not dead. I can't really call it active. It's not dead, but I'm hoping the conversation with the Bankers Association may give it life.
Chairman and Mr. Mark, we have inquired as to the status of this fund, but we have not received any answers at this time. We have currently asked for that. But to elaborate on what Mr. James said and Ms. Trotman said concerning the fund, we thought about, and this is one of the presentations that we had made when this fund was established, that we would have something like the DOMA fund that was established after the 1990 coup, where it was established for DOMA in Port of Spain, where the business rose from the ashes. And we felt that, and this was a fund that was done through the central bank. And this is a presentation that we had made at that time. To do a fund like that, 3%, 4%, 5% interest, or with all the other reliefs and so on, because, as Ms. Trotman said, this is development. We have lost all these guests. We need to rise, and we need help, and this is the kind of help. The commercial rate at that time, 12%, some went as far as 14%. Now imagine, you already owe the bank. They're already sending you those fancy letters, and now you are going back to them to ask, yes, it's a state guarantee, but now you're coming with a state guarantee of 14% and the like. It just could not work.
So could you indicate what measures your association intend to pursue to achieve and or realize those objectives that you outlined? Developmental, as my friend was indicating, getting maybe the central bank to have some backroom responsibility, reducing the rate of interest from 14% to 5% or thereabout. What active measures are being pursued by the association to impress upon the powers that be that this is the route that we have to take to revive the industry in Tobago and the economy by extension?
We have to keep lobbying, as we have been doing. We also have to, as I stated earlier, I think we need to have help, because we are volunteers. We need help in collecting data to prove the return on investment of tourism. If we can actually prove the worth of tourism, I think we will get a better buy-in from people. We're looking forward to the meeting with the Bankers Association to see where that can lead us. But many, many countries have development banks. And if we can show the return on the investment, which I'm confident we can, then all of those questions will hopefully give confidence to the ministers, the finance minister, to support a tourism industry that we know can be supported and grow and answer a lot of the problems that Tobago has. We will continue to lobby. We have a wide cross-section of membership. We're a very large organization. And it's not understood the benefits and the wide-ranging nature of tourism. And until we can get, and I understand that because it's an oil and gas company. I used to work for British Gas. It's an oil and gas country that has not had to consider tourism like the other islands in the region. But, I mean, it's interesting this week. I got calls yesterday because of some statements that were made. We know the problems that have happened in the region with the hurricane. We have offered our help to the different tour operators and travel agents. We've been working on this since last Wednesday, I think it is. We worked all day yesterday, explaining to the tour operators, travel agents, which the majority of us do our business with. And that may help us for this winter. But unfortunately, what's going to happen when these countries rebuild, their standard and quality is going to be so much higher again than we are. And we learnt this with Grenada. When Grenada was hit with Ivan, we had a very good year, the year it was hit. We helped them out. We saved airlift. One of the things we have to do, you see, a lot of these airlift is shared. And Grenada would have lost airlift if we hadn't have stepped in and helped them. And when they rebuild and the quality is that much better, they then take the majority of the business and the higher prices. So we have to look at this holistically and look at how we can create a development bank, understand the value that tourism really has, and as I said before, the added value that we have in Trinidad and Tobago because of the manufacturing inputs. And this is the argument in the lobby that we have to do. And we hope we can be more successful this time than we've been in the past.
Chairman, I have two final questions.
Mr. Mark, Ms. Cook and Ms. Trotman just want to emphasize something. Yes.
Okay, I needed to address what Chris just said, because I heard the Prime Minister in his statement indicated that, his statement went, and his tone was like Tobago was not as forceful in its quest to, to seek the benefits that exist now in bringing persons or bringing airlift to Tobago because of the hurricanes that are happening up the region. But just as Chris said, it is clear that we have already reached out to operators and representative travel agents to ensure that we get some of that business. And we reach out in such a way to look at the region as a whole so that the region is not looked at as an at-risk region in this hurricane season, so we can look at it holistically. So the point I'm making is that when the Prime Minister indicated that we talk a lot about the ferry fiasco, to know that private sector in Tobago, even though he may not have heard it in the media, have actually reached out to tour operators and travel agents to see what assistance we can get in bringing some of those airlift to Tobago, because Tobago is one of those low risk hurricane area, being the lowest hurricane belt. And we have tapped into that by reaching out to these foreign agents to assist us.
And to add to what Ms. Cook said, while we have done that, we recognize that the state needs to do its part in terms of destination marketing that joins that together. Because yes, our hotels are available, but how are they going to get here? If they have to make 2-3 stops and stop in Trinidad where the issue of getting to Tobago is a problem, then we end up in the same situation. So it's both, it is a collaborative effort that we as private sector need to do our part, and we are doing that in terms of engaging the tour operators, but there also needs to be the other part of the destination marketing that enhances that. But I wanted also to go to what Member Mark talked about, what are we as the association actively doing as it relates to the fund. I think over the years we have lobbied, we have gone to the bank, we have written to people. I think the fact that we are here today, we are taking this as our grandstand to say we need that tourism fund to be revisited and to open the discussion so now that the state, it can't be left in for us to negotiate with the bankers, because as I said, the commercial bank is not an appropriate vehicle. They're in the business of making money on interest, so then low interest loans are not their thing unless they're very humanitarian. We now need to re-engage the discussion. And therefore, we are looking forward now, whether it's to the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Tourism, to now be meeting with private sector in going forward on that particular fund.
Member De Freitas, we will come back.
Can I just add one very quick question to that, because it's very important. First of all, when we're calling these agents at the moment, just to underline this point, the biggest question we get, biggest complaint we get, is that it's very difficult to sell a brand that's not known. It's very easy to sell a brand that's known. And when we phone the tour operators, whether they be in New York, Germany, Stockholm or London, they're all saying to us, Tobago's a hard sell, nobody knows the destination. We can do our part in market our hotels, our guest houses, our restaurants, but it is expected generally that the government, whether it's central government, THA, do the destination marketing of Tobago. We have to have that to make this an easier sell. And just one very final quick point. Back in the year 2000, we had 53,000 international tourism arrivals. When that dropped down to 46,000, we thought we had a crisis. Now, just let me remind you, last year we had 19,000 international arrivals. Out of that crisis in 2000 that we had, the then Prime Minister formed a standing committee on tourism, and we created a 3-year rolling plan. This 3-year rolling plan, which started in 2002, took us to the 88,000 arrivals in 2005. This had involvement of everybody, the banks, everybody was involved and bought into this document. What I'm reading from the banks is if they have something similar to this, they will hold off. If the government can help us, this was government-led, this was TDC, this was Dr. Carla Noel and Ferry were the providers of this. And Patrick Manning was the chairman of the standing committee that was held in Tobago on a monthly basis. This gave the banks confidence that something was going to happen in tourism and held off all the problems that we could have had. So this is what we need to do again. We need to do a 3-year rolling plan to build tourism back up to what it was. And we have all the evidence to prove that. And in the previous JSC meeting that we did, back in April. A lot of the solutions we came with in the April meeting, where THA and ourselves were asked to appear, are in this document. Nothing's new to what we were saying then. If this may be good to refer to, because it was in more detail about tourism. So I just wanted to show those two documents because it's critical that we get the buy-in from the general public. We need an education program. We get the buy-in from the banks, and then we understand the value of tourism. And this was a very detailed plan that got us up to 88,000 tourists in 2005. Thank you.
Yes, Member De Freitas, and you'll bring us back to the question of ferries.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, De Freitas member. Coming back to the question of the ferries, I've been listening, and let me just thank you for some of the recommendations that you've put forward in relation to this issue. And I'm just thinking in terms of the ideal situation being Tobago owning its own boat and operating its own bridge in conjunction with Trinidad owning its own boat and operating its own bridge, so much so that if one goes down, there's always the other to fall back on. And therefore, there's not an Achilles heel situation that would occur. That's from the public sector standpoint. The question that I'm asking is that there's obviously a demand, heavily weighted on the Tobago side, for use of that bridge. Has nobody ever thought from a private sector standpoint operating that bridge? And I ask this because I'm aware that there is a company that leaves out of Chagaramas that services Trinidad to the Grenada. So obviously it's possible if they can do that. So is there nobody in all of Trinidad and Tobago on the planet by way of venture capitalism that can set up a private sector bridge? And I will tell you why. Because as much as we have the port in Trinidad and the port in Tobago, which is government owned, and eventually a port in Toco, which is government owned, a private sector individual can then utilize that resources and pay the port to utilize those resources to operate the private sector. Of course, a feasibility study would need to be done. In your dealings from the business standpoint, have you ever heard that offer being put forward?
I've heard different offers. I think before we get to that, and I think that we need to drill, as Mr. Khan said, we need to drill down more in some of these areas. The port infrastructure needs to be improved to actually do a lot of these things. There is no reason why we can't have direct shipping to Tobago if we improve the port infrastructure. But that has to be all part of a growth plan. If we sit down and create this another rolling plan, a growth plan, then you will interest private investors into doing all sorts of things, not just the ferry. And you have other viable options for the ferry, as we've discussed. There are areas where you can do, I know there was a Southern Cruise Ship initiative that was talked about. All of those things can be considered once we have the proper infrastructure and a plan to actually achieve it. So I think it's possible, and I think we can, in the future, if we have the plan, you will attract the investors.
And if I'm to add to what Chris says, I'm not sure what is the legal scope that the current system allows for the private operation of such, and those may be some of the things we need to look at so that that infrastructure and the environment for a private operator to do such could exist. I'm not sure it allows for at this point in time. So hence, that's what that special purpose vehicle would embrace and look at all of those possibilities, because then that now becomes part of the whole process of the economic development, creating the room for another class of entrepreneurship to arise.
Member Mark.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned earlier on the whole issue of licensing to foreign investors because of the appropriate legislation that has been in existence. Could you share with us what the association is doing or has been doing to bring about a greater level of efficiency in the delivery of these licenses? Because you're saying in the legislation, it is supposed to be 20 days, but it takes 2 years. And that is, in fact, having a debilitating impact on that foreign element as it relates to investment opportunities within the Tobago economy. So I wanted to ask you, what steps or measures have the association taken to deal with the powers that be and all the major stakeholders to ensure that the act is effected in the way that the drafters of the legislation intended, so that that issue could be addressed?
Within the document, we've asked for a review, but what we have done over the years that it's been implemented, along with the Chamber of Commerce in Tobago, in our opinion, it was never needed. There was never a need for a land license regime. It actually did a lot of damage to us internationally. Secondly, we then went along a line of creating what they call DDAs, Designated Development Areas. There were several reports. There was actually a report called the Neil Wilson Report, which has a whole host of incentives that we wanted to introduce. The reason the designated development areas didn't work is because the total lack of confidence, again, that we're serious about tourism. Until we show that we are serious about tourism, we're not going to get the investment. The land license hurt so many people, hurt 12 projects, that rebuilding that confidence is going to take a while. It hurts us because as we're in the business, and we've got people in our association that have been in the business for 50 years, and they give us advice. Where every day we get a thing called the Caribbean Journal, and every day there is a new hotel, a new investment in a different island. Tobago is not receiving that investment purely because we do not have a proper plan of structuring a tourism development for an island. That's what we have to do. We have to sit down at all the things that Mr. De Freitas said. We can sit down and look at how all of these things, there's money in the region. I told you, 30 million people came to this region last year. 30 million people. Trinidad and Tobago got about 2.5% or something of those people. This is tremendous money we're turning around at a time when the economy needs money, foreign exchange. And if we can put a plan together, sit down. This plan only took, the 3-year rolling plan took six weeks. We sat down and put an initial plan together within 6 weeks. We can build on that plan, there are many ways you can restrict investment in areas you don't want. We did not believe you needed a license plan. The license is a deterrent. Other islands have it, and it's worked very well because most of them do it in 15 days, 20 days. It wasn't 2 years. I don't want to get into trouble. It was 18 months is the average. 18 months is the average. But if you've got money to invest, you're not going to wait 18 months to invest it. You walk away. And that's what we've had time and time again. We've had many investments. The site that Sandals is proposed to go on, there were many investments. At one time, there were 2 hotels that wanted to go on that site. People walk away. The Tobago Plantations site was never completed because the foreign sales stopped. Those foreign sales, those villa sales, were actually filling the front of the aircraft because those people would come time and time again. They were actually sustaining airlift that because of our room stock we couldn't sustain. So it all has to do with a plan.
But Member Mark, if I'm to go to what you're saying, what we're actively doing, the ease of doing business in Trinidad and more so Tobago is horrible. So you would write documents, you would write letters, and we don't know where those letters or documents would end up. So it's not that you're not engaging in talking or making your voice heard. That's why sometimes the only reprieve we may have may be going in the press, because it seems when you go through the channel, it gets blocked somewhere, or it can go so far and no further. So I would give that to what we're doing with regard to the land license. The ease of doing business and getting your voice heard through the system, there seems to be a lot of noise.
The issue of procurement and the ferry service. Could you indicate to this committee whether an undertaking was given to involve the Hotel Association and other stakeholders in Tobago that because of the importance of the sea bridge and because of the recent debacle that we have experienced, that henceforth there will be an engagement, an involvement of stakeholders, including your association, in the tendering process for the acquisition of new vessels. Today is the last day for persons who are interested in bidding for a new vessel via tender in the newspapers through the Port Authority. Could you tell this committee whether at your various meetings with the Minister of Works and Transport, the Honorable Rohan Sinanan, and the Honorable Prime Minister, that any undertakings or commitments were given to the stakeholders of Tobago to be involved in the tendering process, meaning that if you are going to put out for a vessel the kind of specifications that you would need in that sea bridge for that kind of vessel to ensure that we have the adequacy needed. Could you indicate whether there was any undertakings, any assurances, any commitment given?
Senator Mark, we'll have to say no rare indicators were ever given to us that we would be part of the process. Mind you, we have lobbied for it and we have never had any objections, but we have never had any indicators. What we have indicators is to be directors on the port board as well as Caribbean Airlines to increase the directors and add more presence, a Tobago presence. But the procurement as well as the tendering, nobody has approached our association to be part of that. Mind you, this is one of our recommendations, to be part of the procurement process. Yes.
We know that the chamber has before been engaged in such, and have provided specifications as to what the Tobago need is for both cargo and ferry vessels. So we know they have done that. We are hoping that they would have taken that into consideration as they went out so that they wouldn't have needed to come back. But as Ms. James said, no one has approached this particular association.
I would now invite you to make any closing remarks. Would you care to?
Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of my team members, the people of Tobago, and all who do business with the ferry, we thank you for this opportunity. After 4 days of testimony, we are given no indication of how and when this crisis, because we are still in it, will end. What have we heard from the days of testimony? Bay Ferries maintenance contract was cancelled and millions of dollars were saved. And we asked, and our members asked, to whose benefit? Next, it was replaced by Magellan with no maintenance component. There lies the problems with the ferry. This morning, ferry can't move. Galicia departed with no replacement. Conflicting testimony from all parties involved. Evidence of many episodes of bad corporate governance. Public servants, past and present ministers in questioning, want to be politically correct and clean. No real answers. We are yet to hear words to the effect that they have Tobago and Tobagonian best interests at heart. At this point, we thank the Prime Minister for his apology on Monday at the JSC sit-in. As we look to the future, we refer to the last Joint Select Committee report on the THE. The dependency of Tobago on Trinidad, which has put us in this, what many would call in Tobago, a hostage situation, must end now. The solutions presented, if adopted, will fundamentally change Tobago's interaction with the outside world. It will eradicate the isolation as we open for business and meaningfully participate in the growth of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. We again sincerely thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to hear our views, the views of the people of Tobago. We thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other member wishes to speak?
Thank you, we're okay.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We would suspend until 1 o'clock, at which point in time Mr. Reginald Dumas, former head of the public service, will be appearing before the committee. Again, thank you all for your contribution this morning and in the past, and we hope that at the end of our deliberations, we'll be able to point to the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This hearing is now suspended.